Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Thank you for joining me today for my show, America Can We Talk? Today we're going to talk about the witch hunt in Washington rolls on, Trump's taxes released by the New York Times, Jihad in America, Ilhan, Omar, and Zuhdi Jasser speak out, and the Democrats fret. Will the Caravans kill the Democrats' 2020 chances? And we'll talk about why these matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
And welcome again to America Can We Talk? I'm Debbie Georgatos, and welcome to today's First Five. Everyone's probably read by now that the New York Times released some of President Trump's tax records. And of course, great discussion is ensuing. I will talk in a moment about what those tax records show. And these were not, by the way, the most recent tax records. The records that the New York Times managed to get their hands on are between 20, 25, and 30 years old. But they do have some tax returns by President Trump. And the points I want to make that really matter in this first five are, we are in an era where there appears to be no rule of law. We have a federal law very clear that says taxes, your tax records are private. There are a limited number of circumstances under which the tax authorities are permitted to release your tax returns. The presumption of privacy virtually everyone has with their tax returns is the idea that your money, your business is private to you. What you fill out in your taxes, obviously, if you're in litigation or you are accused by the IRS and you go to court, some of your documents will come up. But the point is, there's a presumption of privacy in the tax world, which actually applies to everyone, including the president. If Trump's critics do not like the fact that he did not release his tax returns, as many presidential candidates do, fine. Criticize him for not releasing his tax records. Criticize him, speculate what must be in them. That's all fair game. But to simply allow the leaking of President Trump's tax records is a really bad signal for America, for every citizen, with the idea, because the idea behind it is the law doesn't really apply, the rules don't really apply if you hate the person, the one you're targeting, enough. Second point is the New York Times, the ringleader, at least among the ringleaders of the Democrat media mob, could not wait to print President Trump's tax records again from 25, 30 years ago, couldn't wait to release them as soon as they were illegally handed over to them. No record yet, no evidence yet that the New York Times turned in the leaker, went ahead and reported someone who had released private tax records, and apparently no authority, no thinking within the leadership of the New York Times. I wonder if we're setting a bad precedent. The New York Times, along with so much of the left-wing media mob in this country, is so determined to take down President Trump that every single rule, assumption, principle, matter of decorum is cast aside. Anything to get this president. This is a very bad precedent for Americans who like privacy in their taxes, and yet another signal that the New York Times does not belong in the position it holds itself out to be in the higher echelon of journalists in this country who claim they have journalistic integrity. I don't recall seeing the New York Times digging, for example, to find President Barack Obama's college records. He, for whatever reason, did not wish to release his academic records, still has not to this day. And some people criticized it, people on the right criticized it, said, hey, you're fair game, you're a president, we get to know, what you studied in college and what grades you got. And he just said no, and he let the chips fall where they may among the American people, among journalists. That was the right attitude, and should have been the attitude toward President Trump's tax records. So the precedent being set is very unhealthy. The message from the New York Times is we have no journalistic integrity left. We are simply on the get Trump train at all costs. But digging now, so those are my basic points, my first five today. As to what those records include, people will be, and this will become the Full Employment Act for Andrew Weissmann. If you recognize that name, Andrew Weissman is an attorney who was inside the Department of Justice. He is one of the lead people being described and talked about in great detail in Sidney Powell's book, License to Lie, for his astonishingly corrupt behavior in the Department of Justice prosecution of Enron. Corrupt, vicious, militant, just a brutal guy. He was a bad actor in that era, in the Enron case. He's a bad actor today as he worked under the Mueller team going after President Trump until they finally figured out there was actually no Trump-Russia collusion. Well, Andrew Weissman left the Mueller team a few weeks ago, and when I heard about these taxes President Trump's taxes being released, my first thought was, good, now Andrew Weissman is going to find something to do. Because you have to know the real reason the New York Times was willing to release tax records unlawfully was because they're hoping something in there, some nugget that can be dug out, will be grounds at the minimum to smear President Trump, but more likely in potential to lead to impeachment. This is the Andrew Weissman full employment effort by the New York Times. Andrew Weissman and lawyers like him who are dedicated to hating President Trump will be digging through these tax records for weeks and months to come, finding something in them potentially either unethical or maybe even arguably illegal. So this is where we are in this, and we're going to be talking about, if I had to give a theme for today's show, is how desperate the Democrat Party is as we stand today in May of 2019. We have a Democrat Party, nothing to run on, nothing to stand for. Their entire effort to destroy President Trump falling apart in front of them. This tax records is just the latest assault on President Trump. The release of his tax records is the latest assault on President Trump and the latest determination by the left to find some basis to destroy this president. We're going to talk in just a moment about the other ways in which the left is going after that. But to close this first five, if there is not outcry by Republicans in Washington, by conservative media, by the American people about the outrage that the privacy that everyone in America is actually entitled to have about their taxes actually still exists, that journalistic integrity matters, that the New York Times willing to release stuff that has there was no lawful release of his tax records, there was no permission given, there was simply the determination by the left, we're going to get this guy somehow, and the tax records seem to be the best way we can go. This, my friends, is an outrage, and it actually hurts all Americans. And that is today's First Five. Next up on America Can We Talk, you know, I want to hit on a subject that I touched about a little bit last week, and this kind of idea about jihad in America. And I want to explain to you why I say that and why I'm just concerned about where we stand in America with respect to attacks by radical Islam and coming from radical Islam. I'm going to start with one little good news story, which is if any of you around the world, and in this country around the world, have been watching, you know the name Asia Bibi. It's a woman named Asia Bibi who was incarcerated in Pakistan for a very long time, threatened, given the death penalty for violations of Islamic law, violations of Sharia. Asia Bibi was released, and that's a great thing. She finally is in freedom after death threats, being chained up for 8 years for things like blaspheming the prophet. Or one charge against her was that she left the Muslim faith, which she says she was never part of, to become Christian. And this was another, charge that stems from Sharia. So Asia Bibi freed, that's great. But what I want to talk about in America today, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that happened in America, and then get around to our friend, Representative Ilhan Omar. Okay, to start with, if you don't know the name, the story, it was all over the news. I never even got to it last week, but there was footage released by apparently some parents at an Islamic school in Philadelphia. This was the Philadelphia Muslim Society, and children doing in this video released to the public. This is here in America, not Pakistan, not Saudi Arabia, not some Muslim majority country. Here in America, young children, apparently American citizens, or parents who are American citizens, young children who were dancing and performing and reciting language in a school performance along the lines of I'm going to read you some of the language these kids were doing in this school performance. We will defend Palestine with our bodies. We will chop off their heads. Speaking of Jews, we will chop off their heads. We will liberate the sorrowful and exalted Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the one in Jerusalem. We will subject them. Again, she's talking about Jews. A young girl will subject them to eternal torture. Other language of that kind in a school performance in this Muslim school in Philadelphia, and it made the news only because some parent apparently recorded this performance by children in a school in the United States of America, talking about killing Jews, talking about chopping off their heads, proudly talking about them. In fact, I'm going to read you some other language that these kids were wearing Palestinian scarves. So, the kind of fighter scarf, the Palestinian scarves. Glorious deeds call us and lead us to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The blood of martyrs protects us. On and on and on. Vitriolic anti-Semitism in a school in America, in this Philadelphia Muslim society. So that became public. A lot of outrage was expressed. The Philadelphia Muslim American Society, that was responsible for this location, which has 42 chapters in America, released and one in the United Kingdom, have on their website as saying their mission is to move people to strive for God consciousness, liberty and justice, and to convey Islam with utmost clarity. They are trying to convey Islam with utmost clarity. After this clip of these students at the it was actually the Muslim American Society Islamic Center in Philadelphia. And by the way, the only way that came to people's attention is because it was published on a fabulous website, Memory, M-E-M-R-I. And it is a memory.org. You've got to go see this website. You've got to understand what's being taught, what they're doing. Memory actually helps by translating things that are said in Arabic to English so Americans can hear for themselves what imams and mullahs around the world are saying in their mosques, saying from their pulpits, saying in their meetings, saying in their talks, when they're speaking in Arabic. Memory provides a service of translation of statements by all sorts of imams and mullahs all over the world and translates it into English so we can all understand exactly what's being said. So once that became public, that these students in a school in America were saying these things, then this Muslim American Society put out a statement, we really didn't kind of mean that. We need to vet better. This just wasn't well vetted. We didn't realize what was going to be said. It wasn't well vetted. So I'm telling you, that statement was not made at the time of the performance. It was not made in the days following. It was made once Americans became aware of what was being taught in America to these Muslim students. Second story in America. There was a young man, and I had not even heard this story until recently, a young man in Chicago who got arrested. He was an American, a jihadist, a terrorist. He tried to buy weapons, bomb material, so he could commit an attempted slaughter of infidels. So he is trying to buy bombs. Fortunately for us, he was buying them from someone who was undercover FBI, so he wasn't really getting bombs, but he thought he was. He had a plan to go ahead and blow up a bunch of innocent Americans. And this is a guy, his name was Adel Daoud, and he was 18 at the time of all this, and as an 18-year-old, he was, to use the incorrect term, radicalized. He was simply following the teachings of Islam that say that dutiful, devout Muslims must kill or convert infidels. That's what he was doing. So he's trying to do this. He got caught, fortunately for America, and he ended up being charged and prosecuted. And so he sat in jail for apparently around 6 years. He's sitting in jail. The case finally went for sentencing in front of an Obama-appointed judge named Judge Sharon Johnson Coleman. Judge Sharon Johnson Coleman, Obama-appointed judge, is facing this young man who tried to buy bombs to kill in their words, slaughter the infidels, kill a bunch of innocent Americans. And the judge said, in listening to the recordings that the FBI made, their undercover recordings, working with this kid who's trying to buy bombs to kill people, the judge said, as I listened to this young man, at the time he was 18, he was an awkward young man with few friends, probably drawn to this. He talked about his, she spoke about him as kind of in a sympathetic manner, that, he was just a young kid. He didn't really know what he was talking about. So the prosecutors were seeking a sentence of 40 years, which, when you think about a sentence that someone might get for killing one person or killing multiple killings, trying to get, the prosecutors wanted 40 years. The kid has spent 6+ years in prison, and the judge sentenced him to 16 years in prison, so not 40, but 16, and gave him credit for the 6 years already served while he was awaiting sentencing, and agreed that all of the charges to which he pled guilty, all of those charges, he could serve his sentence concurrently. And when judges sentence criminal defendants, they can choose whether to sentence someone to serve time concurrently, which means all the charges you had, you're serving time for the same time, or the other choice is consecutively. You serve your first 10 years for this crime, next 6 for this, so you make it a longer sentence. She went out of her way, this judge, an Obama-appointed judge, to give this young man who was a young Islamic jihadist, trying to kill innocent Americans, to give him the least time she could. He has basically 10 more years in prison, and he gets to get out. And she was just talking about him in a very, very sympathetic way. Very alarming when you see a judge sympathizing with a young man who admitted, he wasn't even hiding it, admitted this is what he tried to do. Last story about America before I turn to this idea of what I'm talking about that's happening in this country. When I had the caption for this part of my show was Jihad in America. We have Ilhan, Omar, and Zuhdi Jasser speaking out. So one of the story was this. There is what happens in Europe and around the world as Islamic aggression occurs is quite often you'll have police and media fail to be unwilling to name the perpetrator and name the cause or source of their actions. You will have people yelling Allahu Akbar, which is they're committing Islamic jihad, but they'll be reported as young man, age 27, kills innocent people, with no reference to the cause, the purpose, the reason behind it. And so the media in Europe especially has been, in fact, the EU, the governing body of the EU, actually sent out a directive to European Union countries to ask the heads of those countries to make sure and tell their police authorities and their media authorities not to attribute Islam, not to attribute Islamic terror or jihad in their charges and in their public statements and in their media announcements, even when the incident that was being described or being charged was Islamic jihad. The EU itself is trying to tell police and government authorities to hide the source. Well, there was one particular thing the New York Times picked up on, same kind of thing. It's just a small example when I talk about the danger to America. The New York Times covering a story about what was happening in Indonesia. There is a radical segment of the population of Indonesia are radical Muslims. They are Islamic terrorists. They engage in terrorism in behalf of and in the name of Islam. But the New York Times, in covering one particular story related to an attack in Indonesia, used the term, and here's their headline, New York Times, faith politics on the rise. Faith politics on the rise as Indonesian Islam takes hardline path. They can't just say Islamic terror. They're trying so hard to not acknowledge the truth of what it is that if you read it, you could first think, well, I wonder who they're talking about. And I'm telling you these stories to get around to, I would say one more thing about Europe and then get around to Ilhan Omar and Zuhdi Jasser. In the last couple of weeks, there was a meeting among key European leaders a meeting that was set up ahead of time prior to the formal meeting of the EU. There's an EU Parliament coming up. But prior to that, on April 25th, several European nationalist parties met in Prague on April 25th ahead of the European Parliament elections. So there's European EU elections on May 23rd to 26th. So these leaders in Europe met on April 25th, and they had a rally, and they called it the Movement for a Europe of Nations and Freedom. Movement for a Europe of Nations and Freedom. So all of the real freedom fighters, the leaders in Europe, the people who are speaking up about what's happening to their culture, happening to Western civilization, happening to Western Europe, they met in Prague to talk ahead of time before we get around to the parliament elections. They had 9 nationalist parties meeting there. So 9 parties, political parties from different countries in Europe meeting together to talk about their goal, 2 essential goals. One is stopping mass migration to Europe, and the other is the recovering of national sovereignty within the European Union. So, you know, for example, when Brexit, the British pulled away. By the way, I have to tell you something about Brexit in a minute, but when Brexit was the British vote for England to pull out of the EU, part of their argument was, beside their onslaught of immigrants that were threatening the security of England, the argument among the people supporting Brexit, which did pass, was the argument we want to reinstate European culture, Western culture, British culture, rule of law, a peaceful society where we respect the individual rights of others. We respect the rights of individuals to live in freedom, to choose their own path, to make their own path of freedom and religiously in their speech and their assembly. They wanted a restoration of the British culture of liberty. And that was what pushed this Brexit movement. Well, this idea is spreading throughout Europe. There is a notion among many European countries, the desire of some people to restore the culture of their countries. It is not a racial thing. It's not about skin color, much as people on the left around the world try to say. What it really is about is restoring the culture that Western civilization was based on and requires, which is a rule of law based on representative democracies, a republic where you elect people and they make the laws, and that religious authorities do not make the laws, where everyone's subject to the same laws, where there is a culture of mutual respect, the belief in and understanding of the right of the individual to live in freedom. These fabric of the culture of Europe has been crushed, and it has been invaded and then crushed by the mass immigration to Europe, which has caused all the problems we talked about in the show many times. So in Europe, they had this meeting in Prague, and the people who attended it, the groups were the president of the Czech Freedom, like Czech as in CGECA, Czechoslovakia, Czech Freedom and Direct Democracy Party. They had the Dutch Freedom Party, Geert Wilders was there, the French National Rally leader, Marine Le Pen, the president of the Movement for a Europe of Nations, Giraffe Animans, and the British, anyway, a variety of people, I can't read all their names. People from Italy were there, people from the European Union itself were there, all talking about to reclaim their culture in Europe, they have to stop the mass migration, and they have to restore the culture of their countries. They want their, and again, it's not racist. It's not even ethnic, even in Europe. It is the idea of the values that created those countries that have been swept away, crushed and harmed by the just massive influx of immigrants and the rise of a kind of a globalist mindset in Europe that wants to crush and destroy, obliterate, wipe out the individual, unique nationalist identity of various countries who are part of the European Union. So that was a big meeting. Big things were said, a lot of statements. In fact, if you go to our website, americacanwetalk.org, you can find this article where the quotes, you can read some of the quotes by the people who went there. They just want their culture of liberty back. They want the Western civilization freedoms back. the presumption of freedom, the notion of rule of law, which necessarily excludes the no-go zones that have been set up all over Europe. They want the culture created by historically the Judeo-Christian culture trying to reassert, and they want that back. So that happened in Europe prior to this upcoming meeting of the European Parliament. So now getting around to Zuhdi Jasser and Representative Ilhan Omar and where we are in America. President Trump, when he ran for president, among other things, talked about the idea that we have to vet who's coming here. We have to carefully figure out who it is who wants to come to America, especially from countries that have a true significant problem with Islamization, with Islam as a conquest ideology, with Islamists who are pushing to force Islam on others. It wasn't just the violent jihad, which of course is horrible, we've talked about, you can't have that, but even more than that, it was the mindset, the culture that says because we are part of the Islamic faith, we're part of the conquest ideology written into the core of Islam, and we are going to push that ideology everywhere. That's the kind of thinking that President Trump was talking about when he said we have to vet who's coming here, understand what they stand for, what their purpose is in coming to America. Because where Europe is, why they have a need to have a conference, an international conference in Prague, is because they didn't do what President Trump is talking about. They weren't careful about who was coming there, and they've been overwhelmed. So now we have in America, I will want to play a clip in just a moment. It's just a tiny little clip, but the ongoing challenge that President Trump faces when he's got, for example, Representative Ilhan Omar, the Democrat Muslim member of Congress from Minnesota, making repeated, obnoxious, anti-Semitic remarks of all kinds, and that those remarks just virtually ignored by her own political party, that her party can't punish her. Why don't you hear just a tiny bit of what she had to say when she was talking recently on a media outlet. Here she is.
I remember when I was in college, I took a
Gotta turn her way up.
And
is that a such thing?
yeah, there was.
So you go out, there is a lab for that?
There was a class that you.
Do you go to a lab?
No,
you go out
we,
a field trip.
we learned the
Algeria?
ideology of.
I'm glad you do that.
And so it was the thing that was interesting in the class was every time the professor said Al Qaeda, he sort of like his shoulders went up, and you know.
Yeah,
he was
he's
sort
in
of
command
like,
here.
Al Qaeda, you know, Hezbollah.
He's an expert.
And it was, you know,
What's his name? What put his name on the
we
Where
are
does he
not
live?
saying his name.
If you couldn't tell what she was saying, there was an interview with Ilhan Omar, it was actually years ago, but she was giggling throughout the interview about what a cool thing Al Qaeda is. Al Qaeda, giggling and talking about how her professors, oh, it was really cool. So I raise that to say that the challenges that we face in Europe, the challenges that Europe is trying to correct, the challenges that we have in America when a judge can't figure out whether to actually severely punish someone who is planning on an Islamic Jihad attack and blowing up people. And, you know, I could spend the rest of the show and all next week running through all the stories that barely make the news in America, where our FBI is uncovering Islamic jihadist plots all the time in America. They barely make the news. They'll have stories, well, yeah, but they caught this guy. No worries. He was going to blow up the New York City subway system, but hey, it didn't work. So no big deal. The threat of Islamic jihad is very real in this country. And it is not just the threat. It's bad enough, the jihadist violent attacks like this kid in Chicago wanted to do, like the New York subway, like all the other ones we know about and talked about so many times. But it's really a deeper and more serious threat to our culture of liberty, our fabric of liberty in America. And that is the threat that there is a mindset within Islam that simply says, we will dominate Western culture. We will change Western culture. You will, Western culture, become submissive to Islam. This is a mindset that has been part of Islam from its founding, from the time of Muhammad, and throughout all time and history. I am not saying every Muslim. I am not saying every Muslim does this. I am saying it's been a problem from the founding of Islam, that there is a mindset of the right of Muslim conquest, the Muslim conquest ideology, the right of people acting in accord with the teachings of Islam to forcibly convert people to Islam, kill or convert the infidel, whether by violence or manipulation of the society. So I raise all this to say, because I want to get around to something Zuhdi Jasser said in an interview. And if you don't know that name, Zuhdi Jasser, he is the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Zuhdi Jasser is an American Muslim. He's a doctor, a medical doctor. He lives in Arizona. He's been on a mission for decades, trying to bring the message to Islam in America that in order for Islam in America to be accepted, to flourish, Islam must modernize. Islam must moderate. Islam must drop the idea that is in the Quran, was taught by Muhammad, it is taught by imams and mosques around the world, that devout Muslims have the mission to kill or convert the infidels, that it is the duty of devout Muslims to force Islam on everyone. Zuhdi Jasser at least has had the bravery to say, and he tries in America to bring this message out to Islamic leaders, to Islamic centers, to mosques around the country, that we can't, the traditional Islam that indeed does embrace the conquest ideology, it cannot function in America. We can't have that here. So Zuhdi Jasser, interviewed last week, talked about the fact that Representative Ilhan Omar and Representative Rashida Tlaib are normalizing Islamism in American politics and culture. I want you to think about what he's saying. He still calls himself Muslim. He still wants to be Muslim. He is recognizing that Islam has, as a massive faction among its followers, those who embrace Islamism, the political weaponizing of the faith of Islam, the conquest mentality of Islam that says Islam shall be forced on everyone. He, a Muslim American, Zuhdi Jasser, is bringing this out, that both Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota and then Representative Rashida Tlaib of Michigan are normalizing Islamism in American politics and culture. He also talked about the video that we talked about a moment ago depicting Muslim children wearing Palestinian attire and singing jihadist songs that got all over the internet, fortunately, because of Memory putting it up. He said, people see these clips. I want you to listen to what Zuhdi Jasser said. People see these clips and they think it's just an aberration or a one-off. Even the bizarre Philadelphia Inquirer had the temerity to have a reporter report after this was going viral that the heads of the school said this was an oversight and it wasn't properly vetted. Listen to what Zuhdi Jasser is saying here. The only thing that wasn't properly vetted was that some parent posted it. The bottom line, says Zuhdi Jasser, is that the Muslim American Society has 35 chapters, and among those chapters, they run a number of charter and private schools. According to the Chicago Tribune, no vast right-wing conspiracy are they, Chicago Tribune. The Chicago Tribune had a large three-part series in 2004 with an undercover Muslim reporter in one of their schools in Chicago, and showed that they are clearly the mirror image. They are the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. Again, you can read this article at americacanwetalk.org. On my homepage, under shows, list of links, you can read this article. When American Muslim Zuhdi Jasser is telling America that we have a serious problem in this country with Islamization, we have a serious problem with children being taught in Muslim-run schools in this country to behave like the students that we all watched in that video from the Philadelphia Islamic School, encouraging children, celebrating, singing about cutting off the heads of Jews, of bloodletting, of killing Jews, killing people, and this was a school performance. Like your kids might do a school performance and, I don't know, sing Christmas carols or some other thing. This is what was happening in Muslim schools in America. So I close out this segment by saying, pay very close attention to what Zuhdi Jasser is telling you, telling America about what's happening right under our noses. We have to be awake in this country. We have to get past ducking and cringing and hiding when the American left and the Democrat media mob and the New York Times label anyone who dares to point out the Islamist danger in this country. We have to get over being afraid just because the left-wing mob will call us Islamophobic or hateful or some other mean-spirited word. What is happening in America can end up destroying our culture of freedom. It is part and parcel, what Zuhdi Jasser is describing, part and parcel of what happens when a country, a culture is asleep at the wheel, is not aware of what's happening around it, is too busy virtue signaling our acceptance and our love of multiculturalism and diversity and all those other happy talk words. At the same time, a culture that would destroy our culture of freedom is running rampant in our country. And finally on the show today, I want to turn and talk about this really almost entertaining story, kind of interesting story that came out. It's actually a Breitbart story, but I did a little bit of media about this morning. I'll be talking about it again tomorrow. But there's growing concern in the Democrat Party in this country that the caravans at the southern border are going to hurt their 2020 chances to win the presidential election. And you know, you want to say, yeah, of course they are, but I really want to dig in and talk about why and why the Democrats are in such a ridiculous situation in this context. The southern border is overrun with illegal immigrants. Leave aside child traffickers, drug traffickers, gang members, Islamic terrorists, other criminals. Leave aside all those folks. Overwhelmed with straight out numbers of people flooding our southern borders. And yet, the Democrat Party would not fund the wall, using a wall in the portions of the southern border where nothing else would work. They wouldn't fund the wall. They're now in the middle of a meltdown inside the Democrat Party in the House over whether or not to give President Trump the $4.3, I think it was, billion he asked for recently, a second and new request. We talked about it a few days ago on the show with James Carafano. But this request is not for building a wall. It is just for beefing up the forces along the southern border so we have sufficient border patrol, we have sufficient housing to have these people coming into America who want to come here and move here, be here. They want to be, they want to seek asylum. And we, because we don't have sufficient housing for them, have been doing the catch and release thing, which is a result, of course, they are caught, they release, and we never see them again. So Trump is just saying, just give me the money to make the border a little more secure. Forget about the wall. Just money to secure the border. The Democrats cannot agree even on that. Within their caucus in the House, the U.S. House, the Democrats are arguing about whether even to give Trump that, because it is estimated by the Democrats that 80% of their base, their party's radical base, approves of the current migration rules, the current let the border be unsecured rules, or simply wants no border at all. So the Democrats are in a pickle. Do they dare secure the border or help secure the border, help beef up security by giving Trump his money and alienate 80% of their base who simply don't want any borders? They're in a pickle, and I think it's a great, great thing. It's a great opportunity to ask yourself, for America to ask itself, what does the Democrat Party stand for? What are they for? They don't want secure borders. They're in an argument within their House caucus, not just about the whether to give Trump that money. They're also in a fuss over DACA. You know, the DACA thing is still in their minds. These are kids who came here, their parents brought them here, and they're kind of having in limbo status. Trump offered them a great solution, would have permanently protected them. They wouldn't take it. They wanted full citizenship. So now the Democrats are in a fuss about whether or not even the criminals with criminal records who happen to be in DACA should get citizenship. That is where their head is. They're so far off the path of figuring out anything about America's identity, security, and immigration rules. They can't even agree that people who have no legal right to be here, they cannot even agree that you're going to block somehow their ability to get citizenship just because they have a criminal record. So that's happening in the Democrat Party. They are in a world of hurt because they have nothing logical to say. I mean, they really are become a party that, at its highest intellectual level, the highest mindset of the left wing, the anti-American left, simply is a globalist party, a globalist mindset, very much like the EU. Globalist in nature, can't really get into the idea that it matters whether there is an American identity, just like the European Union can't get into thinking whether there's an identity that is inherently French or Italian or German or British. It's an abandonment of nationalism and national identity in the EU that just says, hey, one big globe, that's all we are. Same mindset at the top of the American left in our country, the top of the Democrat Party. They don't care about the border because they are globalists. They would be just as happy to abandon. That's why they can't stand securing the border. They can't stand trying to help President Trump secure the border. And a few other things that make you realize how much, just how much even the left-wing thinkers in this country are realizing how far out of whack the Democrat Party is with the American people. Even the New York Times, the mouthpiece of the American left, the co-leader of the Democrat media mob in this country, the New York Times came out last week and said, hey, you know what? President Trump is right. You need to at least give him the money so he can process all these asylum seekers. Now, if the New York Times is coming out at anything in favor of President Trump, you know they're not doing it because they like President Trump. They're doing it because they can see the writing on the wall. The Democrat Party has lost the American people. The Democrat Party will not agree with the idea of having a secure border. They won't agree that we have to have some process that actually vets people coming here. They can't agree that we're going to have actual review, use our asylum laws, apply those asylum laws to people seeking asylum. And you can't apply the laws to those seeking asylum if you've already lost them and they are now loose inside the American homeland, hiding out in sanctuary cities, also supported by the Democrat Party. They are in a pickle in Washington because they started out thinking they could impeach Trump the day after he won. They started all sorts of attacks on him. Attacks now on the Mueller, the Trump-Russia hoax have fallen apart, and now they're on to his tax records. I'm sure they're feverishly digging through tax records, finding something to impeach him about. But the Democrat Party never, ever stands with the American people, and the American people are figuring this out. The American people are figuring out the Democrat Party is not looking out for the interests of the American people. They're more concerned with making sure that everyone illegal who wants to come in our country can come and never have to go home and have access to all sorts of taxpayer-funded resources, housing, education, medical care, handouts, food, everything. And the New York Times is figuring out this is not playing with the American people. Last thing that happened was amazing for Trump is that the appellate court, the Ninth Circuit, the evil Ninth Circuit, which normally can't even stand to give Trump, even when the law is clear, won't rule in his favor. Even the Ninth Circuit decided recently that Trump's policy of forcing asylum seekers to stay in Mexico, the RIM policy, remain in Mexico, that policy actually is lawful and agreed that Trump can do it. So, on the end of the day, at the end of this segment of the show, I just want to tell you folks, this is a time for you to be thinking about and how you talk to your friends and how you speak about America. You know, what is it exactly that the American left stands for that helps the American people? That stands up for the idea of America, the idea of citizenship, the idea that our borders matter. The Democrats cannot do it. They cannot articulate those things because it's just not where their hearts are. And now, turning to the last segment of my show, I love talking with you about all the stories I talk about every week. I want to talk about why they matter to you. So why our stories matter to you. Trump's tax returns published. These were 85 to 94 tax returns. So, these are old. These are not last year's tax returns. They were considered unimportant by the American people who voted Trump in 2016. They didn't care. The Democrat media mob tried to make them important, but the people didn't care. They have nothing to do with Trump's performance as president. They are nothing but a playground for the mainstream media and the Democrat lawyers to make much ado about nothing. Also, the tax returns. The New York Times' willingness to publish Trump's tax returns makes plain the New York Times, the Democrat Party, deep state, all lined up on the mission destroy Trump. This personal and malicious motivation of Trump's opponents, crystal clear by this publication, and the bias of the mainstream media simply knows no boundaries. Again, as I pointed out earlier, I don't recall them digging for Obama's academic records or any records of his, which he never produced. So you got to the only answer is turn out the mainstream media permanently. On Jihad in America, why it matters to you. This idea of jihadist activity in America is widespread, it's increasing, it's rarely reported. It usually fails because we are diligent in finding it and uncovering it and prosecuting. Media barely reports. You have a media blackout sometimes on the topic. It doesn't change the reality of what's happening. Mark the words of Zuhdi Jasser when he is telling you we have a huge problem here in America with Islamism, when he's pointing. Muslim American Zuhdi Jasser is pointing to Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and saying these people are legitimizing Islamism in America. There is a need for Americans to understand this threat to our freedom. We also have in this jihad situation, it's never about the innocent individual Muslims. It's about the teachings in the Quran and the teachings coming out of the mullahs, the imams, the Islamic schools all over the country, and the Islamic schools all over our country, and the imams and mullahs all over the world. It's not about freedom of religion. It's about a comprehensive ideology that's in conflict with our founding ideals of freedom of religion and the rule of law, the rule of America's law, not Sharia. We've got to come up the learning curve quickly because the left is on top of this issue trying to marginalize anyone who dares point out the story. On the migrant caravans and the Democrats, the migrant caravans were not a thing. It didn't happen in decades past, not in these numbers. The Obama Democrat orders from the time of the Obama era and policies instigated and invited this conduct. Word went out in Central America. They're never going to stop you. Go right up to America. It'll be fine. The Obama Democrat Party's intent was to swamp the borders, make them open, dilute American citizenship, and expand a dependent voting base. I know some of you are thinking, well, I don't think the Democrats are really trying to do that. Yes, that is exactly what this mission is. Fill the country with people who they someday think can instantly turn into an amnesty, make into citizens, and they'll have a permanent Democrat voting base. Last, on the caravans, Americans instinctively embrace a distinction between citizen and non-citizen. We instinctively agree that government assistance should go first to citizens and not to non-citizens. The Democrat agenda violates these good and decent instincts of the American people. The tide of opinion is shifting against the Democrat agenda. And folks, I have to tell you, there was some other great news I could not even get to today because we're out of time on this show. But I'll just tease it for next week. First, I want to tell you about tomorrow, Thursday. I got an invitation to go to the White House. So I'm going to be at the White House tomorrow. I will not be here. I'm going to do a quick little clip in the morning, and I'll tell you about it on Monday. That's pretty fun. Second is the Trump team has reported they have more donations from women in this first quarter, and this, we're working toward re-election already. In this first quarter, more donations from women to President Trump than to any of the Democrat presidential candidates. More on that on Monday. And on Monday, a deep dive into the latest on the Spygate story. So much to tell you. Thank you for listening to America Can We Talk. Please speak up every day in your lives for this precious, extraordinary experiment in human liberty. America, talk to you Monday.
Can we talk? Truth about America.
Can you